Hello everyone, this is Kajyu here. I've got some Magic the Gathering standard deck to feature for you, and it is Black-White Allies Lifegain deck. And as the name implies, it is an ally themed deck. It has Lifegain, and we are playing Black and White, also known as Orzhov. So, one of the beauties of being in two colors in this current standard is that we can run this deck without any fetch lands, which is really important because fetch lands are really expensive, especially since when you play most fetch lands, you typically run a play set of them, and they can get pretty expensive. So this deck is fairly budget friendly. There's some expensive cards here, but they are mostly either a singleton copy or two copies, so that's what makes the deck's price slightly cheaper. Of course, you could upgrade and add more copies of these expensive cards, which will definitely make the deck more powerful and consistent, but it'll also make it more expensive. So right now this deck is roughly around between $70 to $80, give or take. So it's fairly budget, and which is what attracted me to playing this deck. So with that, I'll get started with the mana base. So because we're running two colors and this is an aggressive deck, we're going to be running 4 copies of Caves of Koilos, and it's a land that enters untapped, allows me to get white or black mana for the low cost of 1 damage to myself. But since we're playing Lifegain, 1 damage is pretty insignificant because there's a pretty good chance you're gonna gain that life back and some more. So we've got 4 copies of that. Helps ensure you've got the right mana on your turn 1 and turn 2, which is very crucial. Since we're playing an ally deck where we have 4 copies of ally encampment, generates colorless mana, but if you use this to cast an ally spell, it will add 1 mana of any color. So since all the creatures in this deck are allies, it is essentially a great mana fixer for your creature spells. And it also has an extra ability where you pay a colorless, you tap and sacrifice this land, you can return a target ally you control back into your hand. So it helps save your key ally creatures from targeted removal, sweepers, by bouncing them back to your hand and playing them again, and triggering more rally, which is the main mechanic this deck will be utilizing. And we've got 1 copy of Blighted Steep. It generates colorless, but for 3 colorless, a white, and you tap and sacrifice this land, you gain 2 life for each creature you control. So with Black-White Allies, you're typically gonna be trying to swarm the board. You're not gonna throw your creatures under the bus through chump blocks and trades in combat. So you'll try to have a full board presence, and Blighted Steep will reward you for that by giving you 2 life for each creature you have on the board. Great way for gaining tons of life. And then, to round it out, we've got 6 basic swamps and 7 basic plains for a total of 22 land. Pretty small land base, but this is an aggressive deck. It's going to have a low mana curve, so that's pretty understandable to be running 22 lands. I rarely had a problem in terms of mana, because even with 3 mana or 2, this deck can still put up a fight, which is really surprising. So, moving on to our creature base, we've got Expedition Envoy, 4 copies. 1 white mana is a 2/1, 1 drop. Very cheap, pretty aggressive. It's a 2/1, and also an ally, so it triggers rally. Great to have in the early game, and also great to have in the late game once you have creatures that have rally triggers, because he will trigger rally for cheap. We've got 1 copy of Core Blade Whirl. She has a rally trigger And when Core Blade Whirl enters, or another ally, creatures you control gain first strike. Excellent, excellent mechanic. It helps you win out in combat with first strike. Got 4 copies of Zulaport Cutthroat, also an ally. A 1/1 for a generic and a black. And when Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature you control dies, your opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So when your opponent decides to use removal spells on Zulaport Cutthroat or your other allies, you can make them pay for it by making them lose a life while you gain a life. Very, very effective, especially if you have multiple Zulaports on the field, even if they use 1 removal spell to remove one of your allies. If you have multiple Zulaport Cutthroats, you're going to make them bleed. You're going to be losing a lot of life. And we've got 4 copies of Serene Steward. It's a 2/2 for 2 mana, and whenever you gain a life, you may pay 1 white mana, and if you do, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So the beauty of it is that you can put a +1/+1 counter on any creature, not exclusive to Serene Steward, so you can give it to, let's say, your Expedition Envoy and make him a 3/2. Really good at making your creatures big enough to dodge certain types of removal like Wild Slash and Fiery Impulse. So you can use Serene Steward to make one creature really big, or you can spread out the +1/+1 counters and make a bigger army. And for our other 2-drop spot, we've got Kalastria Healer. 1/2 for 2 mana. When Kalastria Healer or another ally enters the battlefield, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So another way to drain your opponent. Just playing a Kalastria Healer, and they get drained, and the best part is they stack upon each other. So you play 1, they lose 1 life and you gain 1. You play 2, they lose 2, then 3, then 4. So if you have multiple Kalastria Healers on board, the life swings from all these draining and gaining of life can get out of hand pretty quickly. Now moving on to our 3-drop spot, we've got Lantern Scout, 3 mana, 3/2. Got Rally. When Lantern Scout or another ally enters the battlefield, your creatures gain lifelink. Another way to gain life. And we've got 4 copies of Drana's Emissary, a generic, a white and a black for 2/2 flying vampire cleric ally. And at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain a life. So it's a great way of adding pressure, because not only does Drana's Emissary have flying, so she has evasion and swing in for some points of damage, but at the beginning of your upkeep, you get to drain your opponent again. So, which will also trigger Serene Steward if you have Serene Steward in the battlefield. And also, because of all the draining of life that you're going to be doing in this deck, you can essentially use Drana's Emissary as a ticking time bomb and threatening your opponent of them hitting 0 life if they don't do anything about Drana's Emissary. It's a great card. And lastly, in our creature spot, we've got Drana, Liberator of Malakir. For a generic and 2 black, we've got a vampire ally, 2/3, flying, first strike, and when she deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on each attacking creature you control. This is a brilliant ability. So the reason why it works really well is because she has first strike. So what happens is, if you swing with Drana, and let's say maybe a Lantern Scout and a Drana's Emissary, what will happen is, as long as Drana doesn't get blocked, she will deal her damage first, because she has first strike, so she'll deal her damage first to the player, triggering her ability, then she will give +1/+1 counter on each of your attacking creatures. So that means the Lantern Scout and the Drana's Emissary that you use to swing with Drana will receive a +1/+1 counter before they even deal their combat damage. So they get bigger. Keep in mind, Drana also gets bigger too, but she'll get the +1/+1 counter after she's dealt her combat damage. So she'll deal more damage, but it'll be in the next turn. So she's a very great card. Great way of making your army grow. So that's our creature package for a total of 25. Really, really heavy on the creature spot. 25 creatures. So we're running a lot of creatures, which means we're not going to be running a lot of non-creature spells, but the non-creature spells we're going to be playing are going to try and support our allies as much as possible. And one of the ways we can support that is through equipment. So I've got one Stoneforge Masterwork, so 1 mana equipment. He equips for 2, and equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control that shares a creature type with it. And since all of them share a creature type ally, you can make one creature really massive with Stoneforge Masterwork. Great card. And then we've got Captain's Claws. It's a 2 mana equipment, and it costs 1 to equip. Equipped creature gets +1/+0, and whenever equipped creature attacks, you get a 1/1 white core ally token put onto the battlefield. So 1/1 core ally, tapped and attacking. So one of the great combos with Captain's Claws is to equip Captain's Claws with Drana Liberator Malakir. So when it's equipped, you declare attack, you attack with Drana, what will happen is you'll get the 1/1 core come in, tapped and attacking, and if Drana deals combat damage to the player, her ability will trigger and give +1/+1 counters to each attacking creature, including the brand spanking new core ally that you just created. So essentially, you just created a 2/2 core ally. In addition to that, triggering any rally triggers that might be on the field as well. So it's a great combo piece if you can get these two on the board and start swinging. It's incredible. And we've got, for our other non-creature spells, we've got 2 copies of Ultimate Price. One's the Khans of Tarkir artwork, and one is from Return to Ravnica. Pretty straightforward. It's a removal spell for monocolored creatures. Keep in mind it dodges devoid creatures, artifact creatures, so it's kind of a dud in a lot of Eldrazi's because they mostly have devoid. But they're really great against Jace, Monastery Swift Spears, Abbot of Carroll Keeps, Monastery Mentors, all of those really key monocolored creatures. And then we've got 1 copy of Silk Wrap. It's an enchantment, and it exiles a target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less an opponent controls until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. It's a great way of removing some bothersome creatures like Hanger Backwalker, because Hanger Backwalker is technically converted mana cost 0/0, because X is usually counted as 0 in terms of converted mana cost, and also takes care of other cheap problematic creatures like Jace Vryn's Prodigy, Soulfire Grandmasters, Monastery Mentors, and Stormchaser Mage, because he's a 3 mana creature. So Silk Wrap will still hit him. Great card. We've got Valor Stance, got the Fate Reforged artwork and the alternate artwork from the Clash Pack of Magic Origins. So it's a great versatile card that allows you to make 1 creature indestructible until end of turn, so saving an ally, or you can use it to destroy a big creature, anything with toughness 4 or greater. So really good against decks that like to play big, stompy creatures. And we've got 2 copies of Stasis Snare, full art Stasis Snares. So it's got Flash, so I can cast it at instant speed. And it's an enchantment for 1 colorless and 2 white. So when it enters the battlefield, I get to exile a creature an opponent controls until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. Great way of dealing with problematic creatures at instant speed. So, if they decide to dash a Kolagon, you can stasis snare them, because if they dash Kolagon, she she will dodge sorcery speed removal, so the flash it will really comes in handy. And we've got one copy of Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. He is quite pricey, which is why there's only one copy of Gideon here. I was really fortunate to get one from my pre-release, so that's the main reason why he's here. So he's 2 generic for 2 white. You get a 4 mana loyalty planeswalker, and his +1 is he becomes a 5/5 human soldier ally, and he's indestructible, and you can basically use him as a beat stick. And for 0 loyalty, you can make him deploy a 2/2 white knight ally onto the battlefield. And since he's an ally, he also triggers the other rallies that you have from your other allies. Very good at triggering rally for the low cost of 0 loyalty, so he doesn't even minus Gideon. And his -4 is you get an emblem that says creatures you control get +1/+1. So it's a great way of permanently boosting your creatures by making them +1/+1. Very great because, you know, as you can see, a lot of the allies start out quite small. So the +1/+1 emblem from Gideon will really help. But for the most part, I find myself using Gideon's 0 ability, and occasionally his +1 ability if the opponent's board is empty. So, and to round out our non-creature spell package, we've got March from the Tomb. So March from the Tomb is actually the top of our curve for 5 mana. So as you can see, the rest of the spells we have in this deck are pretty cheap. Barring like Gideon and March from the Tomb, everything else is 3 mana or less. So it's very low curve. So March from the Tomb, 3 generic, a black and a white. It's a sorcery speed card that lets you return any number of target ally creature cards with converted mana cost 8 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. So what you do is you cast March from the Tomb, maybe after a board wipe, or maybe after, you know, doing some trades in combat, and you use March from the Tomb to bring back as many allies as you can and get as many rally triggers as you can. So with converted mana cost 8 or less. So the scenario you can have is you can have, let's say, a Calastia Healer, 2 Zulaports, and a Serene Steward. So you can have this kind of situation where you have a Calastia Healer, you got a Serene Steward, and 2 Zulaport Cutthroats in your graveyard, and you cast March from the Tomb, and so we've got 2, 4, 6, 8. So if you can bring back these 4 allies for a total of 8 converted mana costs, which is what March of the Tomb checks, and they will all enter at the same time, but you can stack the triggers in the stack in a way that you want it. So you can stack it in a way so that they all enter, and then you get Calastia Healer's rally trigger. So he drains your opponent for 1, and you gain 1, and then you get another one from Serene Steward, and another one from each of the Zulaports. So you can create 1, 2, 3, 4, 4-point life swing from just bringing them back. And it gets even more crazier if you bring back multiple Calastia Healers this way. It's a great way to drain your opponent for a ton of life and gaining a lot of life out of nowhere. March from the Tomb really helped me in some of the more aggressive matchups I've had, such as a Tarkir Red, where I had to block some of his prowess creatures, or I had to lose some of my creatures from burn spells. So March from the Tomb was very helpful and very powerful, can help with re-establishing your board presence. And that is our main board. So now we're going to talk about sideboard. So for our sideboard, we've got 4 copies of Duress. because Duress is a great card. There's a lot of removal in this format, like so many. We've got Crux of Fate, Murderous Cut, Wild Slash, Fiery Impulse. There's just so many, and you don't want to deal with that. And Planeswalkers as well, because let's face it, we don't want to fight against Planeswalkers because they're a big pain in the butt to deal with. This deck kind of struggles against Planeswalkers, so the best way to deal with those removal spells and Planeswalkers is you yank them from their hand and get rid of them, and you say, no, you do not get to play that card. They go in their yard. Of course, it's kind of, I wish they get exiled, but that would be just too much now. But it's unfortunately it kind of fuels their delve. But I mean, it's one of the best ways for this deck to deal with removal spells and Planeswalkers is to just be proactive and preemptively remove them from your opponent's hand and stop them from playing them before it's too late. So that's why we've got 4 copies of Duress. We've got 2 copies of Radiant Purge. It's an instant for 2 mana, exile target multicolored creature or multicolored enchantment. This is mainly to deal with things like Siege Rhino and Jeskai Ascendancy, which are still both a thing. They're both powerful and very bothersome to deal with, so Radiant Purge is our way of getting rid of it. We've got an extra ultimate price in case we're up against an opponent that has a lot of monocolored creatures. So a lot of creatures in a Tarkir Red are, for the most part, monocolored, because they're pretty much splashing green for Become Immense, Tarkar's Command, and maybe a Den Protector. So for the most part, all their creatures are going to be monocolored. So there's an extra ultimate price in the sideboard if you feel that your opponent has a lot of monocolored creatures that you can take advantage of. And we've got 1 Surge of Righteousness and 1 Self-Inflicted Wound. So Self-Inflicted Wound allows your opponent to sacrifice a green or white creature, and when they do, they lose 2 life. Really good against Abzan, getting rid of their Den Protectors. Basically any bothersome green or white creature that comes in your way, Self-Inflicted Wound will do the trick. Keep in mind though, if they have tokens, this can probably whiff because your opponent still gets to choose what they sacrifice. So they could just sacrifice maybe a white 1/1 prowess monk token instead of the monastery mentor that you intended for them to sacrifice. So just keep that in mind. Your opponent still gets to choose what they sacrifice. And we've got Surge of Righteousness for 2 mana, instant, destroy target black or red creature that's attacking or blocking, and you gain 2 life. An awesome life gain there, and it's really good because it targets black and red creatures, which are really problematic because they're the really aggressive ones. So you could just imagine Monastery Swift Spears, Thunderbreak Regent, and even Kolagon herself. You can use Surge of Righteousness to just outright destroy them before they do any damage. So it's a really good card. And we got 2 copies of Virulent Plague. Although this deck does create tokens to some extent, it's a very small sub-theme, and it can be swapped out for Virulent Plague if we notice that our opponent is playing a lot of token generating spells like Secure the Waste that gives them 1/1 White Warrior tokens, or Hordling Outbursts, Dragon Fodder, or even Gideons and Monastery Mentors and Sorens. So because, if they use Soren to create a 2/2 black vampire flying creature, if you have Virulent Plague, it becomes 0/0 and it's a dud. Same goes for Gideon. If they create a 2/2 Ally Knight token, it's also a dud because it becomes 0/0. Same thing for Monastery Mentors when it creates 1/1 Prowess Monks. Virulent Plague is excellent at hosing down those decks Because let's face it, there are a lot of Gideons and Zorans running around, and the last thing you want is to be overwhelmed with their tokens, and Virulent Plague will help that. It will really help you against that matchup. And we've got one extra Lantern Scout for those really aggressive decks that where you feel like you need more life gain to stem the bleeding. We've got one more Stasis Snare to help get rid of more bothersome creatures, especially if you want them to be exiled instead of destroyed. Maybe, like for example, Hangerback Walkers. We've got Utter End. It's a catch-all exile spell. It exiles non-land permanents, so excellent way of dealing with planeswalkers. And we've got Aligned Hedron Network. So when it enters, it exiles all creatures with power 5 or greater until Aligned Hedron Network leaves the battlefield. Since most of our creatures are pretty small, it's not gonna hit them, but it will hit your opponent if they like to play big Eldrazi's or just big stompy creatures in general. Aligned Hedron Network is there for that. So that is the sideboard, and so I took this to game day and I went 2-2. I did fairly well, considering how stiff the competition was. I got to play against Jeskai Black, Tarkir Red, Mardu, and some Kolagon Dragons. And I did fairly well, 2-2. I felt that I could probably do better, but I feel that that will come with more playtesting and with more experience. So as I keep playing this deck, I feel that I might be able to play better and stand a better chance against them. But overall, I was really happy with how I performed, and for that, I got a full art Immolating Glare for game day, which is really beautiful, very beautiful, full art. So I was really happy, very satisfied with that. So there you have it, white-black Lifegain Allies deck. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope that this gets you inspired to play white-black Lifegain Allies. Fairly budgety deck, and it's still very powerful and functional. It's great at FNM, and it put up a fight on game day. So I hope that you enjoy this deck and give it a shot. And I'm gonna post a tappedout.net link of my Black-White Allies deck, so if you want to read more about it. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.